Crumble, 5.5%. I'll just make sure I get that right. Yeah, so super fruity, super juicy, full of berries, and Matt will tell you a little bit more than me.
I guess first, what we probably should have said before pouring this out, it's got lactose in it, so if anyone has a lactose intolerance, a little too late. This is quite a departure then from the other beers we've tried, which were different styles, but in a similar space. This one's very different. Hopefully we don't need to hold this up to the light to tell that there's quite a significant difference in one respect. So it's this absolutely gorgeous red colour with slightly purple tones to it. So beer's called Berry Crumble. This beer has a huge amount of raspberry and blackberry in this beer, so all of that colour is entirely natural. It's coming from the fruit that's been added. I think it's absolutely stunning to look at. The other thing you may notice on the bit more subtle on the appearance is there's not a lot of foam. Now, in a sense, this isn't designed as such because it would be nice to have a little bit more foam, but this is a consequence of the style of beer. It's a sour beer. I'm sure most of you have tasted it by now, and you will have picked up that it's quite a sour beer. But sour beers generally have relatively low foam to them. That's just a consequence of the process and the pH being quite low. This style of beer is called a kettle sour. Traditional souring methods were beers put into wooden barrels and aged for a long time. Unfortunately, we're too impatient for that. We want our beer sooner than that. We don't have the time to sit in barrel for very long. Kettle souring is a technique that allows us to do the souring process much quicker. So it involves doing a standard mash, which is the process by which we take cereal grains and generate a sweet sugary liquid. The standard brewing process is then to boil that liquid and start adding hops. What we actually do in the case of a kettle sour, we make the wort, which is the sweet sugary liquid, make that in exactly the same way, but when we put it into the kettle to boil it up, heat it up very briefly just to sterilize it, and then we cool it down to about 40 degrees, and we actually pitch a lactobacillus bacteria strain into the wort at that point. So some people seem a little unsure that we've put bacteria into the beer, but I can assure you it's all entirely natural, it's all entirely safe. So what happens is this particular strain of bacteria, in this case, lactobacillus, gives a clue to what it's doing. It actually consumes some of the sugar, but rather than giving out ethanol and CO2 as our brewing yeast strains do, lactobacillus gives out lactic acid. So we're getting this drop in the pH because we're generating an acid, and we get the particular sour flavour from the lactic acid. So for those who kind of like the numbers, a typical beer, one of these guys here, probably pH of around 4 to 4.4, something like this. Berry Crumble and other sours, it's more like 3 to 3.2, so it's quite significantly more sour. So what then happens with the process, once the lactic bacteria has done its job and the wort is now soured, slightly unfortunate for the bacteria, we then switch the kettle on and we boil it up because we don't really want that bacteria getting anywhere else. Obviously it's a commercial brewery. If we get an infection of lactic bacteria in the rest of our beers, we've got a massive problem. So we re-sterilise the wort, and from that point on, effectively, it's the same as any regular brew. We'll boil up the wort. This style of beer typically doesn't have much hop at all. We want to put a little bit in there for a little bit of, tiny bit of bitterness to balance the flavours. Also, one of the benefits of using hops, and ultimately why hops was chosen as the original kind of bittering agent in beer versus other botanicals, is that it provides an antibacterial effect on the beer. That was obviously a great thing when you are looking to, for example, ship your beer over to India, and that's part of this backstory of how IPA became the style that it is. A lot of hops, it helped preserve the beer, not just for flavour. So in this case, a little bit of hops go in to provide that bitterness, but also just to make sure that we are we're keeping a sterile wort. And then it's fermented with USO5 again, so a standard brewing yeast. Once the fermentation is largely complete, we then add a lot of fruit. The brewers don't particularly like this because they come in giant frozen jerry cans, which we then have to decant into the fermenters while it's still going. So it's a bit of a messy job, but we get a lot of fruit in there. We want to keep the flavour of the fruit, but obviously fruit comes with a lot of sugar as well, which we don't want to end up in the can, because then it might ferment in the can, and we've got a problem with exploding cans there. So we put the fruit in while the beer's still fermenting, but at that point we start to develop these amazing fruit flavours, and we generate this beautiful colour. So let's do the tasting as we have the other ones. We've talked about the colour, the appearance. Obviously, some pretty clear fruity aromas, I think, on this beer. There's another flavour in here that I haven't mentioned. It's not a fruit. See if anyone can pick it out. If you've got access to a can, have a look on the back, because there's a hint on there. Is anyone getting? There's a sweet flavour that we've added. Hopefully, if I say it, some people will go, okay. Vanilla.
Again, as soon as you said it.
Yeah. And I think again it's another great example where I think did I hear you say you still don't get it, which is
It's quite smoky, I think.
Smoky.
Oh, interesting.
Interesting. Okay.
It's a little bit kind of pirate shippy.
I love that.
That's the profile you can put on the can.
And this is why we do tastings.
There's me with the boring description of raspberry. Now that you say it, yeah.
Pirate shipping. Brilliant. Yeah.
Burning pirate ship. I never would have thought that. But,
Wait until you get the next bit.
how
What
do
does a pirate
people,
ship taste like?
How do people like this beer? Because this is quite a deviation from the other beers, and it's quite a deviation from what would be a sort of
Sours are typically divisive.
yeah.
I mean, is it a beer? Is it a beer?
Well, it's why isn't it a beer? It's got malt in it, it's got hops in it, it's fermented by yeast. So
It's just if someone gave it, there you go, and I would go, oh, it's not beer.
no,
You know what I mean?
So it's
Pushing the bounds.
Yeah.
yeah,
But
sure, but
you
it's
say that, but the history of sour beer, we are just coming to grips with it in the UK. In Belgium, it's been happening for
Right.
hundreds of years, actually. And
I guess get with the programme. is what
sour,
you're
no.
saying.
I'm going to say that we are just getting to grips in the UK. It's been happening in Belgium for say 100 years.
hundreds of years.
Yeah,
Because
interestingly.
ultimately, before people
Yeah.
understood microbiology, nobody really knew what was happening, right? So there's some styles of Belgian beer that still exist today, and no doubt there's hundreds of beers that have been lost to history, which is a real shame. But you can still get lambic beers in Belgium that are fermented in these giant open containers, and they make the wort in the normal sort of way, and then they just open the windows and let any old thing come in and fall on. Because if it's
really good.
but they end up being a real mix of wild yeasts and bacteria and all sorts of things. And obviously, the brewers, they've had hundreds of years to craft what they do, so they know exactly what they're doing, and they blend it. And those products are absolutely fantastic. They are sour beers ultimately, because they've got limited control over what goes in.
Interesting as well, in Belgium you can buy, so you or I could go and buy the base beer, the wort, and then say buy 30 litres, 20 litres, take it home, add additions. We don't have that culture here, but it's quite interesting that you could buy that base beer and then turn it into something completely different, you know, by adding fruit or, you know, or wine or whatever you might want to do to develop that beer into something else.
It's also fizzy when you first poured it, but it's not now. I mean, I guess it's just flattened, but it was fizzy on the tongue.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point, because there's a difference between the effervescence and the head on the beer.
Right.
So the actual carbonation level in this beer is no different from any of the others. So in that respect, it shouldn't go flatter any quicker. What definitely is the case. These are glasses of Parker that we poured at 6 o'clock, and there's still a bit of foam. So, but this beer, we put some oat and wheat into the grist, not for flavour, but one for body, but also to help stabilise that head. The low pH of this style of beer disrupts that process a bit effectively. That's what happens. So it's an interesting comment, because I would argue the beer isn't flat, it just doesn't have a head on it,
Right.
which is slightly different. Now, having said that, if you've got very little beer in the glass, which you have, and it will have warmed up because you're holding the glass, of course it's going to go flat.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Just
It
not
does.
with the Belgian
It doesn't
idea.
taste. Yeah. On your tongue, it's a bit like.
No, when I first took the first, you said it as well. It's quite fizzy on the tongue.
It has definitely changed.
Well, I guess